Every cast member of the Roy Rogers Show that ran for 6 seasons has now passed away. One died inside a rehabilitation center. Another outlived his own son by 7 years. A third was mounted and sold at auction for a small fortune. All 8 performers are gone now, resting in places that stretch from California to Texas. We begin with a fight almost no actor of his era ever won. Roy Rogers sat across a table from Republic Pictures and walked away owning the rights to his own name, his own face, and his own films, at a time when studios held their stars like property. That single victory built an empire of merchandise, comic books selling 2 million copies of every issue, more than 2,000 fan clubs scattered around the world, costumes and toy pistols in the hands of a whole generation of children. No performer outside the Disney studio sold more lunchboxes, holsters, and bedspreads to American families in those years. On screen, he was simply himself, the white-hatted rancher who rode Trigger through Mineral City and always won clean. Behind that white hat lay a childhood of real hunger. Born Leonard Franklin Sly in Cincinnati in 1911, he grew up in a small Ohio town called Duck Run, quit high school after 2 years to work in a shoe factory, and drifted west during the Depression as a migrant fruit picker. Music finally pulled him out of the orchards. He founded the singing group the Sons of the Pioneers, watched their record Tumbling Tumbleweeds climb to #1, and signed with Republic Pictures, where the studio renamed him Roy Rogers and crowned him King of the Cowboys. Across 13 years, the studio built close to 40 films around him and a golden horse, and during the Second World War, he toured for the troops and sold millions of dollars in war bonds from the saddle. A radio program carried his voice into American living rooms every week for more than a decade, and a daily comic strip pushed his name across the newspapers. The marriage that defined him began on the last night of 1947, when he wed Dale Evvans at a ranch in Oklahoma. That union held for roughly 50 years, through the births and adoptions of a house full of children and through the deaths of 3 of them. His first wife, Arlene, had died of an embolism about a week after their son arrived in 1946, leaving him 3 young children to carry into the life he would build with Dale. Fame did not fade when the cameras stopped. Roy and Dale opened a museum to their own lives, first in California and later in Branson, Missouri, and they sang gospel songs alongside Billy Graham at crusades across the country. At the age of 80, decades after the singing Western had died around him, Roy returned to the music charts with a duet called Hold On Partner, and in 1988, the Country Music Hall of Fame opened its doors to him. Their ranch in the high desert of Apple Valley became the place where they would both grow old and the place where they would both be buried. His end came quietly and grandly at once. Roy Rogers died on the 6th of July, 1998, at the age of 86, of congestive heart failure in his home in Apple Valley, California. The funeral matched the man, a Western service at the Church of the Valley, the Sons of the Pioneers singing him out, his body carried to the grave in a glass-enclosed hearse from 1898 drawn by a single Clydesdale, trailed by mourners dressed in frontier clothes. He rests now at Sunset Hills Memorial Park in Apple Valley, just inside the entrance on the left where the desert he loved runs up against the hills. The boy who once picked fruit to eat had become the one cowboy who owned his own name, and he kept it to the very end. Our second story belongs to a woman who buried 3 of her children and turned each grave into a book. Dale Evvans lived a public life of unshakable faith, yet that faith was forged in losses most people could never carry. Her only child with Roy, a daughter named Robin, was born in 1950 with Down syndrome and a failing heart, and she died 2 days short of her 2nd birthday. Out of that grief came her book Angel Unaware, which changed how a nation spoke about disabled children and led one training center to take her name. She played herself, the cafe owner and cowgirl who rode Buttermilk and stood beside Roy as a full partner. Long before the fame, her life was already hard. Born Frances Octavia Smith in Uvalde, Texas, in 1912, she eloped at 14 and had a son at 15, then found herself abandoned and singing for a living as a young mother in Memphis. 2 more marriages came and went before Hollywood found her, one of them to a band arranger, and neither produced a child. A boss overheard her humming in the office and pushed her toward a local radio show, and a station manager handed her the name Dale Evvans because it was short and easy to remember. Hollywood, when it came, only made the wound deeper. The studio at 20th Century Fox sold her as a single ingenue and passed her own son off in public as her little brother, a lie she was made to carry for years. Grief did not end with Robin. Dale and Roy adopted and fostered children to fill the house, and then heartbreak returned twice more. Their daughter Debbie died in a church bus crash at the age of 12 in 1964. The following year, their son Sandy died while serving in the army in Germany. Each child became another book, Dearest Debbie and Salute to Sandy, written by a mother who refused to let any of them be forgotten. She gathered a household of children from different corners of the world, and she counted every one of them as fully her own. Faith carried her work as much as it carried her grief. She wrote more than 20 inspirational books, performed in hundreds of shows for American troops, hosted her own program on a Christian network, and entered the Cowgirl Hall of Fame in 1995. Among those pages was Happy Trails, which she scribbled on an envelope and handed the world as a song it still hums. Another of their numbers, The Bible Tells Me So, carried that same faith onto the record charts. Roy died before her, and she followed him by less than 3 years. Dale Evvans died on the 7th of February 2001 at the age of 88 of congestive heart failure in Apple Valley, after a stroke and a failing heart, surrounded by a family grown to 6 children, 16 grandchildren, and more than 30 great-grandchildren. She lies beside Roy at Sunset Hills Memorial Park in that same Apple Valley ground. The Queen of the West that America watched was, in private, a mother who buried 3 children and wrote her way through every grave. Third comes a face that millions of Americans once called the handsomest in the country, dying unnamed in a charity hospital for forgotten actors. That was the long arc of Reed Howes. In the early 1920s, his features sold shirts and detachable collars in the famous Arrow advertisements drawn for the whole nation to see, and one film studio billed him outright as America's handsomest man, promising audiences 8 pictures built around his looks. The drawn Arrow figure he modeled grew so famous that the fictional character received bundles of fan mail from women who had never once met him. He appeared as a recurring lawman of Mineral City, a worn face of authority at the story's edge. His beginnings read like invention. Born Herman Reed Howes in Washington in 1900, he served in the Navy in the last months of the First World War and captained the Pacific Fleet swim team. While studying at Harvard in 1919, he pulled 2 drowning people from the surf at a beach in Maine. Modeling found him, fame found him, and for a few silent-era years he co-starred with some of the most famous actresses alive. Among his leading ladies were some of the brightest stars of the silent screen, and for a short while the studio spoke of him as the next great romantic lead. Sound destroyed all of it. When microphones arrived, the studios decided his voice and his acting could not carry a leading man, and the handsomest face in America slid down the bill into anonymous villains in cheap westerns, year after year, until failing health forced him to stop altogether. He married 3 times across those decades, to Lillian Peachin, to Catherine Tabor, and to Mary Donovan Howard, though the public record keeps little of those private chapters. The long decline ended where many discarded actors ended. Reed Howes died on the 6th of August, 1964, at the age of 64, inside the Motion Picture Country Home and Hospital in Woodland Hills, the industry's own charity refuge where he had been confined for months. He lies at Fort Rosecrans National Cemetery in San Diego, a Navy man returned to a military grave above the Pacific he once swam. The face advertised as the handsomest in America died a nameless heavy and was buried as a sailor, which may be the truest title he ever held.